Everyone assumes you're either scared of the pain or just boring. But the real psychology behind why you've never gotten a tattoo has nothing to do with either of those things. It reveals something genuinely interesting about how your brain actually works. In 2024, not getting a tattoo actually requires more psychological explanation than getting one. Tattoos aren't countercultural anymore, they're everywhere. Which means if you're still unmarked, something specific is happening in your mind, something worth understanding. You haven't been waiting for the right design, and you haven't been searching for something meaningful enough. The real reasons go much deeper. They involve how you experience time, how you think about identity, and how you process permanence itself. You know the conversation. Someone notices your arms, your shoulders, whatever visible skin happens to be showing. They do a quick scan, and then comes the question. Like you've just revealed you don't own a smartphone. Wait, you don't have any tattoos? You watch their face cycle through the assumptions. Maybe you're scared of needles, maybe you're too uptight. Maybe you're just really, really boring. Or maybe, the generous interpretation, you simply haven't found the right design yet. None of those assumptions are right. You're walking around tattoo-free because of complex relationships with time, identity, permanence, and decision-making that most people never examine in themselves. It touches on personality research, cognitive biases, and philosophical questions about who you are versus who you'll become. 20 years ago, getting a tattoo required explanation. Now, not getting one does. The default has flipped, and your choice to remain unmarked reveals something specific about how your mind operates. So let's stop pretending this is about fear or boredom. The real reasons start with something you probably haven't considered. That Pinterest board you've been building for years. You're not uninterested in tattoos, not even a little bit. You've saved ideas, probably dozens of them. Maybe you've got a hidden folder on your phone, a Pinterest board you haven't touched in 2 years, screenshots of designs that caught your eye scrolling through Instagram. You've researched artists and you know whose style you like. You might even have a specific person bookmarked. Someone whose work you've been following for years, thinking maybe someday you'll send them a message. You've had the conversations too, detailed ones. About placement, about size, about what it would mean. You've casually mentioned to friends what you'd theoretically get, where you'd theoretically put it. You've thought about the first one leading to more. Wondered if you'd become one of those people with a sleeve. Then nothing. For 6 years, or 8, or 12, that Pinterest board has become a graveyard, a hospice for ideas you're too attached to release and too uncertain to commit to. They just sit there aging while you occasionally scroll through and think, yeah, that one's still good. Then you close the app and move on with your day. This is the first clue that something deeper is happening. The desire clearly exists and the interest is real. You're not avoiding tattoos because you don't want one. Something else is blocking the execution, something between the idea and the appointment, between the wanting and the doing. That something has to do with how you think about the future, specifically how you think about the person you'll be in it. How well do you know the person you'll be in 20 years? I don't mean what job they'll have or where they'll live. Those details are unknowable. Do you trust that person's taste? Do you know what they'll value? Can you predict, with any confidence, what they'll want permanently marked on their skin? For some people, this question barely registers. They feel a sense of continuity with their future self. That person is basically them. Just older, same core, same values, same aesthetic sensibilities. They can commit to a tattoo today because they trust tomorrow's version of themselves to still appreciate it. For others, and you might be one of them, the future self feels like almost a different person. Someone whose preferences you can't predict. Someone whose taste might drift in directions you can't anticipate. Someone who might look at your current choice and wince. This isn't anxiety, and it's not pessimism either. Psychologists call it a lower sense of temporal self-continuity. You don't feel a strong, unbroken thread connecting who you are now to who you'll be then. The research suggests you might be more accurate than people with high continuity feelings. People change dramatically over time, and preferences shift. What felt meaningful at 25 can feel embarrassing at 45. Your hesitation might be epistemic humility. You're saying you can't sign a contract on behalf of someone you haven't met yet. Except this goes even deeper. Underneath the future self problem is a more fundamental question about what identity even is. There are 2 basic ways people think about who they are. The first model treats identity as relatively fixed. You have a core self, a stable essence. Sure, you grow and develop, but the fundamental you remains consistent. Like a tree adding rings, you expand, but the center holds. The second model treats identity as fluid. You're a process, constantly evolving, sometimes in directions you couldn't have predicted. The person you are now might share memories with the person you were 10 years ago, but you're not really the same entity, more like a river than a rock. People who get tattoos, at least in the moment of getting them, tend to operate from the first model. They're marking something true about who they are, a fixed point, an anchor, something stable enough to warrant permanence. People who don't get tattoos often operate from the second model. If you genuinely believe you're constantly becoming someone new, a permanent mark feels like a contradiction. You'd be etching today's self onto tomorrow's canvas, pinning down something that, by definition, should be allowed to change. This is a philosophical position about the nature of selfhood. You're protecting your future self's right to be different, refusing to foreclose possibilities you can't yet imagine. Every tattoo, no matter how meaningful, represents a closing of doors, a declaration that this thing, right now, matters enough to be permanent. If you're not sure anything is that permanent, how could you make that declaration honestly? This connects to something psychologists have studied extensively, the end of history illusion. When you understand it, a lot of things start making sense. One of the most consistent findings in psychology research. People dramatically underestimate how much they'll change in the future. Dan Gilbert at Harvard spent years documenting this. When you ask people how much they've changed over the past 10 years, they readily describe significant shifts, different values, different tastes, different priorities. They recognize that past them was basically a different person. Ask those same people how much they expect to change over the next 10 years, and something strange happens. They predict almost no change. They assume they've finally become who they're going to be. History is still happening, but their personal history has somehow reached its conclusion. This is the end of history illusion. The persistent belief that now is a special time. That the person you are today is the final version. That the changes are behind you, not ahead. The strength of this illusion varies between people. Some people have it strongly. They genuinely feel finished, settled, complete. Others have it weakly, or have somehow seen through it. They're aware, in a way that's hard to maintain, that they'll probably look back at current them with the same mild bewilderment they feel looking back at past them. If you don't get tattoos, there's a real possibility you have less of this illusion than average. You're not assuming you're done becoming. You're holding space for a future self whose taste you genuinely cannot predict. The research suggests this might actually be the more accurate position. The people who feel most stable tend to change just as much as everyone else. They're just less aware of it happening. Your hesitation, what looks from the outside like fear or indecision, might actually be a more sophisticated relationship with time. You're refusing to commit because you understand something about how identity actually works. Now for the irony. 20 years ago, visible tattoos were a statement, a rebellion, a signal that you existed outside mainstream norms. You were an artist, a musician, a punk, a biker, someone who deliberately rejected conventional respectability. Getting tattooed meant something about who you were and how you related to society. That world is gone. Roughly 30% of American adults have at least one tattoo, and among millennials, over 40%. In certain urban environments, certain creative industries, certain social circles, it's the majority. The unmarked body has become the unusual one. The countercultural choice became the cultural default. The rebellion was absorbed into the mainstream so completely that it stopped being a rebellion, which raises a question: what's actually nonconformist now? Going to a beach in your 30s with completely unmarked skin is borderline performance art at this point. You're the statistical minority, the one who didn't follow the crowd. If tattoos were once about standing apart from the mainstream, and the mainstream now includes tattoos, then standing apart looks different than it used to. You might actually be the nonconformist now. Defining yourself in opposition to trends is just another form of letting trends define you. Sure, but the social reading of your choice has completely inverted. The whole framework of conformity and rebellion has shifted, and your choice now exists in a different context than it would have a generation ago. Social meaning is only part of the story, though. There's a personality dimension here that predicts tattoo avoidance better than almost anything else. Psychologists have spent decades mapping personality traits, and the most robust framework is called the Big Five: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. When researchers look at who gets tattoos, one trait shows up consistently: openness to experience. People high in openness are more adventurous, more aesthetically inclined, more willing to try new things. They score higher on creativity measures, they seek out novel experiences, and they get more tattoos, on average, than people low in openness. But openness isn't one thing. There are multiple facets: openness to aesthetics, openness to feelings, openness to new ideas, openness to actions. Another trait interacts with openness in complicated ways: conscientiousness, the tendency toward organization, planning, and careful consideration. People who are high in openness but also high in conscientiousness show a specific pattern. They're interested in tattoos, they appreciate them aesthetically, they might even have detailed ideas about what they'd get, but they're also deeply aware of the permanence. They think long-term, they consider consequences, and they don't make irreversible decisions lightly. This combination creates exactly the profile we've been describing: someone who wants a tattoo, has saved dozens of ideas, researches artists, thinks about placement, then never actually does it. The openness provides the interest, the conscientiousness provides the break. If this sounds like you, you're not fighting yourself. You're operating with a personality configuration that makes this particular decision genuinely difficult. The same traits that make you thoughtful and careful in other domains are making you hesitant here. Speaking of things that seem like simple explanations but aren't, everyone assumes you're avoiding the pain. It's the go-to explanation, the socially acceptable reason. When someone asks why you don't have tattoos and you don't feel like getting into the philosophy of identity and temporality, you can just shrug and say you don't like needles. Conversation over. But let's be honest, pain isn't the issue. You've done hot yoga and worn shoes that definitely didn't fit because they looked good. You've held plank position until your entire body shook, and you've sat through 3-hour work meetings that could have been emails. You've had dental work and you've experienced emotional pain that makes needle-based discomfort look like a gentle massage. You can handle pain. When people tolerate pain, it's usually because the pain is justified by the outcome. The workout hurts, but you want the fitness. The waxing hurts, but you want the result. The medical procedure hurts, but you want the health improvement. Pain becomes intolerable when it feels arbitrary, when the payoff isn't worth it, when you're not sure the outcome justifies the experience. That's closer to what's happening. The pain of a tattoo isn't the barrier. The uncertainty about whether the result will be worth it is. You'd sit through the needle if you were sure. You're avoiding the risk of permanent regret. Which brings us to something much more interesting, something that might be operating underneath your conscious awareness. The phrase you've probably said dozens of times: "I'm waiting until I find something meaningful enough," sounds reasonable. You don't want to get a random flash design just to have something. You want it to matter, to mean something, to represent something real about who you are and what you value. The trap is that standard keeps rising. Want to level up your people skills? Join our community on YouTube or on my Patreon for exclusive scripts, early access, and connection with people who get the social struggle. Links below. Let's master human interaction together. 5 years ago, you might have gotten a small symbol that meant something to you, but you wanted it to be perfect, so you waited. While you waited, your conception of meaningful enough expanded. Now it's got to be a perfect symbol, perfectly designed, perfectly placed, representing something so core to your identity that you'll never outgrow it. You've already established that you believe identity is fluid, that you can't predict future you's preferences. The standard you're setting is actually impossible to meet. You're asking for a tattoo so perfect that a person who doesn't exist yet, whose taste you can't know, will still approve of it decades from now. That's a trap, not a standard. Psychologists distinguish between maximizers and satisficers. Satisficers make a choice when something is good enough. Maximizers can't stop until they've found the best option. Maximizers are often less happy with their choices even when they objectively choose better options. The search itself becomes exhausting. If you're a maximizer about tattoos, you might never find one that clears your bar. Because the bar isn't really about the tattoo. It's about the impossibility of guaranteeing future satisfaction. Perfectionism disguised as having standards. Underneath that, perfectionism is something even more fundamental. Something about how you anticipate regret. Your brain does something interesting when it predicts future feelings. When you imagine getting a tattoo you end up regretting, the image is vivid. You can see yourself looking at it, wincing, wondering what you were thinking, explaining to people that it made sense at the time. The regret feels real and specific and painful, even though it hasn't happened. When you imagine regretting not getting a tattoo, the image is vague. Just a general sense of maybe wishing you'd done something. An absence rather than a presence. A might have been rather than a definite mistake. This asymmetry is how human cognition works, and we imagine action regret more vividly than inaction regret. The tattoo you got wrong is easier to picture than the tattoo you never got. When you're weighing the decision, one side of the scale feels heavier than it actually is. Research on regret shows something counterintuitive. In the short term, people regret actions more. That bad tattoo, that impulsive decision, that thing they did wrong. In the long term, the pattern reverses. Over years and decades, people increasingly regret inaction, the things they didn't try, the risks they didn't take, the experiences they opted out of. This doesn't mean you should go get a tattoo tomorrow, but your regret prediction system might be systematically biased. You're treating future regret from action as more likely and more severe than future regret from inaction. That might not be accurate. Your mental math is being done with weighted dice. The outcome might still be correct for you, but it's worth recognizing what's happening under the hood. We have temporal psychology, identity beliefs, personality combinations, perfectionism, and regret asymmetry. But there's another possibility we haven't explored yet. One that doesn't frame the unmarked body as lacking something. Some people without tattoos aren't avoiding them. They're actively choosing the unmarked state. This might sound like semantics, but the difference matters. One framing treats no tattoo as a default, the absence of a decision. The other framing treats it as its own positive choice, a deliberate preservation of something valued. Some people genuinely find the unmarked body beautiful, complete in itself, not a blank slate waiting to be filled. They don't see empty space, they see skin. The body as it came. Something to be cared for, rather than decorated. This approach isn't better than getting tattoos, just different. A different relationship to embodiment, a different aesthetic sensibility, a different understanding of what the body is for. If this resonates with you, it might reframe your whole relationship to the question. You're not avoiding something, you're succeeding at preserving something you value. The unmarked state is its own form of expression. Some people garden, some people prefer wilderness. Neither is wrong, just different relationships to the same thing. But let's be honest, this philosophy doesn't describe everyone. Some of you aren't preserving anything. You're just stuck. You know the script, you've said it 100 times. Someone asks about tattoos, you say you don't have any. They ask if you ever would. You give the answer. That's become so automatic, you barely hear yourself saying it anymore. Maybe someday, I'm still thinking about it. I'll probably get one eventually. How many years have you been saying this? 5, 10, 15? At what point does not yet become never, and why is saying never so hard? Maybe someday keeps a door open. It preserves optionality. It lets you remain a person who might get a tattoo rather than becoming a person who won't. Those feel like different identities. The first one is open, flexible, still becoming. The second one sounds closed off, decided, maybe even boring. So you stay in maybe someday limbo for years, sometimes for decades. This limbo has a cost, though. You've spent mental energy on this question. You've revisited it after major life events, thought about it during periods of change, carried this low-grade decision as unfinished business, a question that's never quite resolved. What if you just decided? Not necessarily to get one, but to stop saying maybe, to actually choose, either direction, and let it be done. The piece of a closed question might be worth more than the theoretical optionality of an open one. You've been about to get a tattoo after at least 4 significant life events: graduation, breakup, promotion, crisis. At some point, you're collecting origin stories for a tattoo you'll never get. Which brings us to the real question. After all this psychology, what does your choice actually reveal? What does your tattoo-free state actually reveal about who you are? First, it reveals something about your relationship to permanence. You might be someone who treats permanent decisions with unusual seriousness, who recognizes that forever is a long time and acts accordingly. This same orientation probably shows up in other areas of your life: big purchases you deliberate on, commitments you don't make lightly, decisions you take time with. Second, it reveals something about your relationship to identity. You might be someone who experiences selfhood as more fluid than fixed, who doesn't take for granted that current you and future you are the same person. This can show up as flexibility, openness to change, or resistance to labels. Third, it reveals something about your relationship to meaning. You might be someone who has high standards for what counts as meaningful, who doesn't want to commit to something unless it really matters. This can be a strength in some contexts and a trap in others. None of these orientations are right or wrong, just orientations, ways of being in the world. People with tattoos have different orientations. They might have stronger feelings of temporal continuity, more comfort with fixed identity markers, lower thresholds for meaningful enough. Neither approach is superior. Different psychological configurations navigating the same human challenge. How do you mark your existence? How do you express who you are? How do you deal with the fact that everything changes, including you? Tattoos are one answer, not getting tattoos is another. Both answers reveal something real. Whether you ever get a tattoo doesn't matter. Not really. The choice is personal. It's yours. After sitting with all this psychology, you probably understand your own hesitation better than you did before. The point was never to convince you either direction. The point was to show you that your choice, even the choice that looks like no choice at all, reveals something meaningful about how you operate. You understand something about why you've been carrying that Pinterest board for years without acting on it? Why maybe someday has lasted so long? Why the meaningful enough bar keeps rising? Why you can handle pain but not uncertainty? You're not scared, and you're not boring. You're someone with a specific psychological relationship to permanence, identity, and the future self. That relationship is worth understanding, and whatever you decide it knowing why. That's all any of us can really do. I want to know what resonated. Which part made you think, yeah, that's exactly me? And the question that's been underneath this whole conversation, the one you might finally have an answer to, do you think you'll ever actually get one? Learn something new? Hit that like button, share it with others, tap subscribe, and stick around for more. Got thoughts? I'd love to hear them in the comments.